Hi, Julia.
Hi, Jasmine. How are you?
Good. Hello to everyone who's tuning in tonight. Thank
We
you
have
for being here.
we have almost 50 people with us, which is so exciting. And I know everyone here is so excited to get to hear you talk, Jasmine, get to hear you talk about your brilliant, brilliant debut novel. It really is an honor for all of us to get to be here with you and celebrate this accomplishment. If you'll forgive me, I just have to gas you up for a second, gas you up by telling the truth. The School for Good Mothers came out almost exactly a month ago on January 4th. It was an instant New York Times bestseller, picked for the Today Show's book club, and it was met with awe by readers across the country. Jasmine, you know already I'm obsessed with the book that you wrote. I think that you've created a classic, a novel that enters the canon and becomes a must-read for generations to come. I think The School for Good Mothers is absolutely extraordinary. And we're really excited to hear you talk about it. So for folks watching, Jasmine and I are going to get to have a conversation together, and then she'll start answering questions from you at around 7:45. So just as Melanie said, please put any questions you have to Jasmine by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We're really excited to hear your thoughts.
Jasmine. Thank you for that amazing introduction, which I'm just going to need to replay for all the hard days for getting back to writing.
I'll tell you it over and over and over again, as long more than you'll want. Probably you'll probably have to mute me after a while because I'll keep on going.
I just want to say thank you for finding me on Twitter, because I generally find the internet kind of a scary place, but that's how we met. Was you read my book and you DM'd me. So look, I just want to say good things can happen on social media, and I was so excited to hear from you.
Well, we have to give full credit not only to the internet, but into the real world, which is that the brilliant novelist, also a debut novelist, Crystal Hannah Kim, put us in touch, put me in touch with your words. She read your book and was absolutely bowled over by it and said, you have to read this book. And she was absolutely right. And I feel that Crystal is one of your many advocates and fans in the world.
And then you took a picture of my galley in your son's crib, which was, I think,
yes,
very
yes, a little creepy. So, we're talking so much about this incredible book that you wrote. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this incredible book you wrote. I always like to hear how authors describe their book in their own words. So would you mind telling us, in your words, what is The School for Good Mothers about? And maybe you could read a little bit from it for us?
Sure, I'm going to read just 2 pages from chapter 1, but first I would say The School for Good Mothers is about Frida Liu, a Chinese American single mom who leaves her daughter home alone for a stretch of time on her one very bad day. And as a result of that decision, she gets sent to an imaginary government-run reform school where she's re-educated with mothers from across the county whose transgressions range from benign to horrific. And they have to spend a year at this institution to try to get their children back. And if they make any mistakes, they'll have their parental rights will be terminated. So the readers will follow her quest to get her daughter back, and also how she holds on to her integrity while she's being indoctrinated. So my elevator pitch for the book has always been that it's a little bit like 1984, but for moms.
I'm sold. I'm resold again on this book. Now that I think we almost be able to tell us. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, read for us, Jasmine. I'm sorry, keep going.
We'll just read briefly from chapter 1. So this is after Frida has met with the police and met with the social worker. She's back at home now. Tonight, again, Frida can't sleep. She needs to tell the family court judge that Harriet was not abused, was not neglected, that her mother just had one very bad day. She needs to ask the judge if he's ever had a bad day. On her bad day, she needed to get out of the house of her mind, trapped in the house of her body, trapped in the house where Harriet sat in her exercise with a dish of animal crackers. Gus used to explain the whole world that way. The mind is a house, living in the house of the body, living in the house of a house, living in the larger house of the town, in the larger house of the state, in the houses of America and society and the universe. He said these houses fit inside one another like the Russian nesting dolls they bought for Harriet. What she can't explain, what she doesn't want to admit, what she's not sure she remembers correctly. how she felt a sudden pleasure when she shut the door and got in the car that took her away from her mind and body and house and child. She hurried away when Harriet wasn't looking. She wonders now if that wasn't like shooting someone in the back, the least fair thing she's ever done. She bought an iced latte at the coffee shop down the block, then walked to her car. She swore she'd come home right away. But the 10-minute coffee run turned into 30, which turned into an hour, which turned into 2, then 2.5. The pleasure of the drive propelled her. It wasn't the pleasure of sex or love or sunsets, but the pleasure of forgetting her body, her life. At 1 a.m., she gets out of bed. She hasn't cleaned in 3 weeks, can't believe the police saw her house this way. She picks up Harriet's toys, empties the recycling, vacuums her rugs, starts a load of laundry, cleans the soiled extra saucer, ashamed she didn't clean it earlier. She cleans until 5, becoming lightheaded from the disinfectants and bleach. The sinks are scrubbed, the tub is scrubbed, the hardwood floors are mopped. The police aren't here to notice her clean stovetop. They can't see that her toilet bowl is pristine, that Harriet's clothes have been folded and put away, that the half-empty takeout containers have been discarded, that there's no longer dust on every surface. But as long as she keeps moving, she won't have to go to sleep without Harriet, won't expect to hear her calling. She rests on her clean floor, her hair and nightshirt soaked with sweat, chilled by the breeze from the back door. Usually if she can't sleep and Harriet is here, she retrieves Harriet from her crib and holds her while Harriet sleeps on her shoulder. Her sweet girl. She misses her daughter's weight and warmth. Thanks.
Jasmine, it's such a beautiful book and such a brutal book too. I love that. I love that section you read there. I love all of it. What were you saying?
Thank you. This section, I always remember it a certain way because my good friend Jordan, who's one of my closest mom friends and who's known my daughter since she was 10 months old. I think it was especially hard for her to read because she was picturing my daughter as Harriet. And so when she got to the end of that passage that I just read, she texted me and she said, "I'm having a panic attack." And I said, "It's only page 12. Like, you need to hang in there."
Did she hang in there or did she have more panic?
She hung in there, but I think she was pretty stressed out.
Have you had a lot of that sort of conflation of you with Frida or with your daughter with Harriet? That must be really challenging.
I don't think there's been that much from the people in like my closest friends. I think it's been a little hard for them to read if they know my daughter, and I have to just tell them like, guys, it's fiction. It's going to be okay. But I've been describing the book as not the most relaxing read, but hopefully worthwhile because
yeah,
I certainly I don't really cry when reading just because I'm on really strong antidepressants, which kind of block the crying mechanisms of one's body. But I think it's been really moving to hear how people have responded to the book because I think there's been a fair amount of crying.
That's so interesting. I was wondering today if you how it felt in your body while you were writing it, because reading it is such. I mean, I crying and like nervously, anxiously laughing, like getting hysterical, and so much tension, so much like tension held in the body. And I wonder you worked on it for a really long time, and I imagine it wasn't the most relaxing experience for you too, but of course it was satisfying and joyful too. What was it like to write this book? It was funny, but what was it like to work on those tense scenes? Did it feel tense to you? Did it feel
I don't remember it super clearly just because I think I was so stressed out, but my husband just the other day reminded me because I was telling him like the messages, a lot of messages I've been getting are about like how the book has really spurred a lot of feelings, which is amazing to hear as the author. But he was reminding me, he's like, yeah, every time you worked on chapter 18, you stopped sleeping, you kind of had a breakdown. So he remembers it very clearly as like, okay, now she's revising chapter 18, like everything has gone wrong now. So I definitely did feel it in my body and did get really anxious. But I think it was just a lot of the tension comes in the editing. Like because I threw out so much material like to get it to like this like sleek, fast-paced sort of plot-driven book through like I threw out just so much along the way. So
how much is so much along the way? Like how much?
Like and truly unfathomable amount. Like I didn't keep track of how many drafts we had. like if I took out, because I'm really bad at throwing things away. So I think there's like bins and bins of paper that are now in my poor parents' basement, because I live back in the town where I grew up. So there's a lot of bins of drafts that they're holding on to for me. But I just went through so many variations of every scene. Like it's got to be the most inefficient way to work, because I write longhand, and I sort of just explored like every different potential avenue, and then just picked the one that worked. So getting to the tense moments was definitely just through revision rather than on the first try.
I love this. I love to hear about your editorial process. I love imagining all these bins someday entering into your archives. This is very exciting. Your parents will be consulted by the curators to get like those big tubs sent over. I know you've said before that it was, not a, and you've said just now, it was not a short process to write this book. And I was wondering if you could tell us about if you'll forgive me, a kind of childbirth analogy. Like, what was the conception of this book? Or what inspired it? What was the gestation period? Like, will you tell us about the process from idea to manuscript to it being a book we can hold in our hands?
Well, the conception was quick. The gestation was really just so long and drawn out. So
that seems appropriate. I feel like that's usually
yeah.
how it goes.
So I work at a snail's pace, and this has never happened before, but the Frida's Very Bad Day grew out of my very good writing day in early 2014. So this is the only time it's ever happened where I wrote for like 6 hours, like in a trance. And what I had was, at the end of that day of scribbling in my notebook, was pretty much the whole arc of the story from start to finish. Like Frida getting Harriet taken away, and then her having to go to the school. It wasn't all in that order, but it had the voice of the book and like the tone, and also the Gust and Susanna story. The dolls, the women in pink lab coats were all there from the beginning, and some of the lessons, and also some of the mothers, the secondary characters. And I had basically the foundation of what became the book. I just didn't know that I was starting a novel. I was just, at the time, I was coming up with short story ideas, because I really thought my first book would be a short story collection, because that's all I'd ever worked on. And saying that you're going to start a novel is a pretty daunting thing to sit down and do. So it really sort of happened into this story a little bit accidentally, while I was just trying to come up with new ideas. And the things that were happening in my life at the time were, I was entering my late 30s, and it was time to make a decision about whether or not to have a baby. And I was feeling kind of crushing pressure, because we didn't feel ready. I worried about how it would affect my life as a writer. I didn't have a book done yet. And so I was thinking about motherhood a lot, and ruminating about it, and feeling freaked out about it. So the emotional engine of the book really came from my anxiety about motherhood. And one of the sparks that came from some reading that I did was the Rachel Aviv article called "Where Is Your Mother?", which was in the New Yorker in late 2013. And that article, when I read it, I didn't necessarily think like, oh, the premise of this could begin this feminist dystopian horror novel. Like it didn't strike me at the time as, oh, I might write about this. It was more that something about that story just lodged in my brain, and I just felt so angry on that mother's behalf. And it was about a single mom who leaves her son at home, and after that day never gets him back. And one of the things that really struck me about that piece was, it felt like they weren't just judging the mom by a certain set of standards. It felt like they were judging a woman who's an immigrant by a very American set of standards, and they were expecting her to perform as an American mother. And it just felt so unfair and so tragic. And I think something about that piece also felt a little bit like science fiction, because the way they talked about parenting and love and affection was just so clinical and kind of terrifying. So that's my incredibly long-winded answer for the conception. The gestation was years and years of trial and error, trying to develop the promising first draft into an actual manuscript of chapters.
It's so fascinating to me to think about how this this book about the kind of difficulties and all-consuming love that is motherhood, both sort of predated and overlapped with your own experience of being a mother. And you know, like, as you said, came out of these intense pressures you were under of course, it was so much on your mind. And then also, the I imagine the project was transformed when you had your daughter in 2017. Is that when she was born, or?
Yeah, she was born in January 2017, a few weeks before the inauguration, during a very stressful time in America. And so I got back to writing probably when she was 9 or 10 months old, and I had to rewrite the whole thing. I mean, it's definitely a very strange process to research and write a book like this while pregnant and while you have an infant to take care of and raise. But in a lot of ways, she and the book, like my human baby and my book baby, grew together, because the book baby was taking quite so long and she was growing so fast. So in some cases, I was just watching like where she was at with her developmental stages, and like how much she moved, how much she talked, and that would just get written into like the particular phase I was at in the book. So the fact that I was working on this particular project definitely allowed motherhood and writing to align a little bit more smoothly. And also I had childcare, which is really how the book got written and done.
That's how anything gets done. Thank God for childcare. And like another subject worthy of many novels, I think, and lots of articles. That's so interesting. Can we sit a second? Can we return to the idea of you after she was born, you had to rewrite the whole thing, or when you went back to the writing after when she was 9 or 10 months old, you had to rewrite the whole thing? Because Crystal recommended this to me, because both Crystal and I have toddlers. We both have babies that were born right around the same time, and the toddlerhood in this book is so gutting and so honest and so it's so true. I mean, everything about it is so real and true and moving and heartbreaking. And I know you said you incorporated, you know, these developmental phases or things she said or moments, but was that what the rewrite looked like, incorporating that material? Or what will you tell again about all the things you had to redo?
I had to redo pretty much everything, because I mean, I worked on it incredibly slowly, and there was definitely a case of I had to really build out the scenes. I had to build out the secondary characters. Also, I think when I went back to work on the book, I had to really develop Frida and the bond between Frida and Harriet more, because I think before I had a baby, I could mostly envision what was going to be hard, and I could only imagine myself failing at all of it, because that's just where my mind goes. And
Totally.
so
Co-signed.
I didn't necessarily like imagine myself being competent at the basics of baby care. And so Frida became more competent. I think it was more possible for me to write about Frida's love for Harriet and capture it in fiction, because I find it much harder to write love than to write sorrow, or like much harder to write like the moments of bonding than the moments of conflict. Like I could write the scenes of them bickering, or the toddler not behaving, but it was hard to write about like the tenderness of like holding a baby, or like the smells, or the looks that you exchange. So real life definitely informed the book that way, but I also really dramatically simplified the lessons. Like in the earlier drafts, I had the moms actually running through fire, like actually escaping from burning buildings. And I realized that I didn't have to have them do like quite such extreme gauntlets, because I didn't know like the getting ready in the morning, or the meal time, or the bath time, or any of the sort of basic, like, here are the 5 steps we need to do processes, are this this opportunity for like operatic emotions like for everyone. Because it's been funny, because sometimes I've had interviews to do in the morning about the book, and I talk about the difficulty of getting out the door. I'm like, and to take today as an example, we just had this 15 minutes ago. So some of that was also just like from lived experience got folded into the book. So I think there was more joy, but also a lot more reality seeped in, because I realized I didn't have to make the moms go through such ordeals, because it turns out like some of the basics are a lot harder than I realized.
That makes so much. I have a one that stands out to me. A lesson that really stands out to me is when they had to sing lullabies at the right softness and soothingness to make the kids fall asleep within 10 minutes, or a timer to see how quickly they can fall asleep, and how. And I love what you're saying here. There is always effectively you don't need to have a building on fire to get the feeling that the building's on fire. Like, the building's always on fire in some way.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, so the building is always on fire in some way. And also, like, if you lose like the magic toy or like the security object, the building is on fire then too. One thing that so hopefully it's okay to say this in a public event. One thing I loved that you mentioned over emails that I've quoted you on in other press is the way you put it was perfect, because you said that the women in pink lab coats sort of embodied how you felt on the playground in Brooklyn, like with your son. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. I'm going to quote Julia on this.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest takeaway, one of the biggest, I had a lot of big takeaways from this book. The book gave me nightmares, actual nightmares. Afterwards, or dreams, maybe I should say. But I think it's just, if anyone hasn't read it yet, it's so vivid, it's so frightening, and it's so real, and it's so urgent. Like, it really matters when you read it. The characters really matter to you. Everything really matters to you. They get inside you. And such a big takeaway I had from it was like that any parent, but really any mother, when examined, is found wanting. It's only like the act of examination that changes a good mother to a bad mother, so to speak. Right. Like, the more you look at someone, the more you find all the things that you judge, and all the things that you, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, or that's not right, or that's not how you should, and Frida is under constant examination. And so everything she does is insufficient. And I thought you did such an extraordinary job at the school of showing like all these different mothers from all these different situations. Every single one of them is seen to be failing because they are seen. It's like the looking at each other did you feel scrutinized as a parent, or did you feel like a scrutinizer of other parents? I often, before I had kids especially, I often judged those around me with kids.
Yeah, I think I was a judgy bystander. I don't think I was the kind of bystander who would call the police on anyone, but I remember, okay, so please don't strike me down, Brooklyn parents. Okay. So I remember, so years before having kids, I remember being very judgy because, I mean, it's now more of a trend to let kids be free and not boss them around. And I remember I was in Park Slope, and a very small child was just walking into the street unaccompanied, and the parents were really far behind him, and they were like very gently telling him to slow down and stop. And I remember giving them a look like what are you doing, guys? Like, why is your 3-year-old walking into the street? These days I think I would be more forgiving, and maybe more patient with those choices. But I think I mean, it's hard not to judge other people's parenting, because I mean, we're just sort of, it's just in the air. I don't know if it's like this in other countries, but in America especially, the judgment of parents is just, it's almost like that's how you're supposed to relate to each other. And like one thing in the book, Bringing Up Bebe, I think it's by Pamela Druckerman, which is like the only parenting book I've read and enjoyed. She talks about how American parents say hello by comparing things. Like, they're staying at the playground and they'll like start talking about developmental milestones or something, and that's just how Americans say hello, like to meeting parents. So I think that that's part of the culture that I found so scary, was that it felt like there was this cult of motherhood, And it felt like moms were under so much pressure, had no social support whatsoever. And also we're just supposed to be perfectly happy all the time. And as someone who has had like lifelong issues with depression and anxiety, like I think the idea that you're supposed to be like at maximum joy every minute of the day with your child or just with yourself, and you're not supposed to have any negative thoughts. I sort of baked that into the book and like made it literal.
So the copy on the back of the book calls Frida, the main character, and every woman for the ages. I was really interested in that because I was really interested in how much you wanted her to be an every woman and how much you wanted her to be her woman. An incredible mom friend of mine who's, I think, here with us tonight, she gobbled the book up the other day and she said that the experience of reading Frida, I have this quote quoted here. She said it was a push and pull between being like, how could you do that? And this could happen to me. And I was wondering if you see Frida as an every woman, and how you, as you wrote, negotiated the balance between her relatability and her particularity, her kind of quirks and specific choices. How much did you want us to feel, how could you do that? And how much did you want us to feel this could happen to me?
Well, I think she might be more relatable because she has so many particulars. And I think the fact that she was never crafted as an every woman probably makes her a little bit more universal.
I love
And
it.
and I mean, she's a very specific character. I think to me, the copy was really exciting because it really exciting to have a Chinese American heroine described as an every woman for the ages, like that this is a story about America, even though it's told from a very specifically Asian American lens. So that's to me exciting to like hopefully like push the conversation forward a little bit. But one big thing I had to decide early on was whether or not Frida was going to do something truly bad, because I had her actually leaving her child at home, similar to what would happen in the Rachel Aviv article. And that was a deliberate choice because when I showed it to a workshop back in 2015, a lot of people said, like readers are not going to get on board with this. Like you can't sell a book that's where the premise is that the mom has done this terrible thing and expect people to read it for 300 pages, because this is not a sympathetic character. Like publishing houses won't buy it, and people won't buy it. And
isn't it wonderful when people in workshops tell you that publishing houses won't buy it, and you're like, where do you work? Do you work at a publisher?
I mean, there's just such a focus on likability for female characters, and I just don't read those books. I mean, I think it's great that there are a lot of books with likable female characters, but that's just not where my mind goes, and those are not the stories I find most satisfying. And so people suggested to just have Frida leave her child in the backseat of the car for like 5 minutes, run into the store, grab her wallet off the counter. Something which actually has happened to friends in my life, where they ran into the store, grabbed their wallet, and then found someone standing at their car ready to call the police on them. So, I mean, that is something that just happens. And I've heard about parents like double parking, running into the post office, something like that. So there was a choice made to not have her do something innocuous, to have her do something that is like really morally problematic, and have her like really reckon with her guilt in that way. So I wanted to write a character who would be actually flawed, and then have to deal with that, and have to deal with it's not like she doesn't pay for it for the entire rest of the book.
Oh my God, yeah.
So it's not like she's off the hook, but I wanted her to really have to reckon with her guilt.
I think it was such a brilliant craft choice. As a reader, it was so brilliant and exciting to have it that that act, that very bad day, that choice, start us off and say, like, here's what's happening, here's what she did, and now she's going to pay for it, and like she's going to pay for it and 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 pay for it, and eventually you the reader are going to have to call into question the whole system that is like designed to punish you eternally for a single error. A craft choice I was also really curious about was I found the way that you tracked time in this novel to be completely gutting. Frida's always counting how long it's been since she last saw her daughter, or how much time they have together when they do see each other, or how long it'll be until they can see each other next. And sometimes the clock resets, and it was like absolutely debilitating when the clock would reset for one reason or another. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that craft choice. What made you decide to sort of keep the story's countdown in that way?
You
Keep the
know,
clock.
there were too many countdown clocks in the earlier draft, and then I got rid of so many, and then we had to put some back. And I got to give a shout out to my copy editor, Erica, who figured out that I was actually using the wrong weeks and months in many, many cases.
Oh
So
my gosh.
she actually made a calendar of all the school's events and like figured out like, okay, there's 7 weeks here, there's 8 weeks here. And it was such a genius move that I wish I had thought of on my own, but copy editors really save your books. I think what I was doing with that craft choice was I made a literal ticking clock. And so Frida knows that she has to get to the end of this year. And then one of the ways that the school really makes life hard for the moms is that they dangle the promise of these 10-minute phone calls, and like whether or not they have phone privileges is something that helps them move forward. So I use the question of time as a tracking device, partly for me who had never written a novel before, but also because I felt like women who were in that position, who knew that they had to serve a certain amount of time, would be very conscious of the passing days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, everything I know you've mentioned like robot dolls. There are, of course, speculative elements, and it's a work of fiction, it's imaginative, and yet it is so grounded in reality and in these broken systems that our society functions with. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of research you did. You've gotten here like the violence of the foster care and family court systems, the arbitrariness of family separation, the creepiness of these ever evolving behavior monitoring technologies, and all the ways these things are implemented differently depending on our race and our gender and our class, our background, national origin. How did you approach blending fact and fiction this way? What kind of research did you do to write the story, or where did you try to sort of adhere to reality? Where did you try to depart from it?
This is another case where I don't suggest anyone emulate my kind of backwards way of working. So I wrote the whole first draft, which took about 1.5 years. And then I started doing research. So I made up whatever I wanted to make up, because I knew that once I went down the research rabbit hole, I might never find my way out if I hadn't gotten to the end of the book. So I wrote the story I wanted to write, and then I went back to do a lot of reading before I started revising it. And so I definitely folded in some of my reading about the family court system. I kind of snuck into the family court building in Philadelphia, like not to spy on court cases, but just to get a sense of the architecture. And I talked to a child psychologist just to like get a sense of like, this is what I'm reading about the family court system and how things break down by race and class. And she said, oh yeah, that's totally how it is. And she was saying that, yes, it is as messed up as everything you're reading about. But what also happened as I was working on the book and like occasionally going to residencies, occasionally telling people about the book, was that every time I would tell people that I'm writing a story about this reform school for moms, everyone had a story for me about like, oh, I heard about this mom who strapped her twins into their car seats while she dropped the older kid off at school and did that for 30 minutes every morning. And so like every person I met would have like another set of stories, and some of those got written into the book. But one article that I think really captures the terrifying reality of what's happening in America is called The New Jane Crow, which came out in the New York Times a few years ago. And that one talked about how primarily women of color who are also poor, get caught in this dragnet of child protective services, and also to have that where they have the threat of losing their children like held over them by landlords and people in authority like that. So it had some really sad stories, like a mom of an infant went to her front door to like pick up groceries, her daughter was upstairs alone. And then I think a series of events resulted in like the baby was taken away for 6 months. She missed 6 months of her daughter's life. So I think what was really shocking to me as I read about these stories was that it happens to thousands of people around America. It's just not always on the front page of the paper.
We're about to go into our Q&A section, but I wanted to slip in one more question for you, Jessamine, before we do, which is, I've been seeing on social media that you and your fellow 2022 authors' debuts have been supporting each other. And it's been really exciting and really moving to see. And I was wondering if you could just tell us briefly how you all connected and maybe make some recommendations of other 2022 must-read books.
Yes, so all the credit goes to Liv Stratman, who is the author of Cheat Day. She started, I think she gathered everyone on Twitter and Instagram because she said, you know, I want to start a group of 2021 debut authors. So this all happened because my book was originally scheduled for summer 2021. So I joined this group and then I became folded into the 2022 authors. But she organized a lot of us to just say, you know, we're publishing books in the pandemic, like let's start a Slack channel where we can like ask each other questions, support each other at events. And that's just been so nice to feel like we're all in it together. And like to meet the other debut authors from my pub day and like my month and to sort of cheer each other on. So one book that I just read, and we're doing an event together tomorrow, is Fiona and Jane by Jean Shen Ho. And that one has made me really emotional and like brought up so many memories of just being a Chinese kid and teenager and young adult and dating in New York. And another book that's coming out in the spring is called Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones. It's a memoir. And as I was telling Chloe, like, I've just made peace with the fact that she's like a better writer than I will ever be. And like, it's the level of the writing, like I'm just never going to get there in this lifetime. And that is okay. It's nice to admire your friends. And I love the novel Little Rabbit by Alyssa Song-Siride.
I just read that this week and I'm like losing my mind over it.
So I lost my mind over it, but the hilarious thing is that Alyssa was my landlord for 4 years in Philadelphia. So we actually never talked about our work. We only talked about like home repairs and stuff. So it's a really exciting new stage in our tenant landlord relationship. I ended up blurbing her book and it's going to be on the cover. And so I was telling her like, this is the next phase of our friendship.
This is it. This was a magical house, I think, that you both lived in.
And then now we both have our pink books coming out in 2022.
Oh my God, I did that book. That book lit me up. I cannot. I'm so excited.
I stayed up till like 12:30 finishing it, which as you know, for parents is very late.
100. I'm right there with you. Sleepless nights over this one. Let's go into our Q&A section. If anyone has any questions, add it to the Q&A box and we can move through them. Okay, Jasmine, this comes from Jess, who asked, in the beginning of the book, Frida repeats that she had a bad day. Then things shift when she gets to the institution to being labeled as a bad mother. How deliberate was this to show that being a bad mother was not how Frida identified herself?
I don't know that. That's a great question first. I don't know that any of the moms necessarily thought of themselves as bad mothers before they went to the school, but I definitely wanted the indoctrination at the school to have a certain element of just constantly shaming them, the way that our society and our world like shames moms all the time. And so the shaming was just built into the whole system there. So that was a deliberate choice.
There's a question here from Tammy that I think is fabulous, who says, you write from the perspective of a mother regarding motherhood. But I was wondering if you could talk about how much your experiences as a daughter and being on the receiving end of immigrant mothering figured into your novel, if at all. The relationship between Frida and her parents is so beautiful and moving. That was me adding that at the end, but Tammy's question. How about your experiences as a daughter and being on the receiving end of immigrant mothering, how those figured into your novel?
Well, it's a great question because I think I think that is one way into the book. I mean, hopefully, I mean, in an ideal world, this would hopefully be a book for everyone. And I think one reason that it has appeal beyond parents is that Frida is also a daughter, and so there's a Chinese immigrant story sort of threaded throughout the book, even if it's not the main storyline. And it was definitely a conscious choice to have free to remain close to her parents throughout. So because it would be a totally different story if the parents decided like, you did this horrible thing, we're not going to talk to you anymore. So building the bond between Frida and her parents was really important to me. But I think my experience as a daughter played into the book just because on a fundamental level, I think that's part of what informed me crafting Frida as an outsider in a lot of ways, because I mean, my parents immigrated from China and Taiwan, and so I'm first generation Chinese American, and I definitely felt very apart from the American family experience, just because Chinese parenting and American parenting are just very different. And I mean, there's Kathy Park Hong captures this in Minor Feelings so much better than I ever could. But there's a certain sort of constant foreignness of being Asian American, like you're sort of always the other. Like I don't know that I've been in any situations in America where it's just all people who look like me, and I'm in the majority. So I grew up in mostly white communities, and so I was always like the only Asian person in the room, for example, and that's just a different experience. And so that really informed Frida being quite so lonely, and like Frida being like so vulnerable and like yearning to belong. So I think that shaped a lot of the family relationships and her character.
And the particular whiteness of her ex-husband's new partner is, I think, superb.
Oh, and she was a fun character to write.
She's a fun character to read. She's a very, yes, like a, she represents a lot and also feels so real. I also want to say, Jasmine, that I saw in the chat that Crystal said how much she loved Frida's description as an every woman for the ages too, that really resonated with her. So,
oh, hi, Crystal.
Laura wants to know if you can talk about the marked difference between the School for Good Mothers and the School for Good Fathers. And she wants to know if you ever thought of naming this novel The School for Bad Mothers, because that title would not have been so effective.
I think I had the title pretty early on. I think calling it The School for Good Mothers is just so much more chilling than The School for Bad Mothers. I think just because part of what's so oppressive at the school is that you're just not allowed to have negative thoughts and feelings ever, that you just have to be sunny and maternal and loving every moment of the day, which would drive most people insane. And so I always had that sort of I think one I don't know which review or article, but there was some reference to the Stepford Wives, and I think that really resonated with what I was going for in terms of this negating your personhood and your identity, and you're all you can be as a mom. And so that element of the story was there from pretty early on. But the School for Fathers was really a place to play with the different expectations of mothers and fathers. And I have to give credit to my friend Keith Wilson, the award-winning poet, who came up with the mantra for the Father's School, and he came up with lots of different ways to sort of highlight the differences. He's like, no, there wouldn't be that many dads there. You should like have them, like everything has to be easier for them. So we together in our he read the book chapter. He and my friend Yvonne Woon read the book chapter by chapter over almost 2 years, and so he came up with a lot of the ideas for the fathers and ways to play with the idea that it was going to be easier for the dads.
It's incredible. It's really incredible. Justine wants to know, Justine says, 2 aspects of the novel that helped make the characters so relatable were the way that you wrote about sex and the relationships among the mothers. Both avoided stereotyping and tropes. Could you talk about the decisions and processes there? So sex and the relationships among the mothers.
Well, I think Frida's sexuality is definitely was something that was always going to be part of the story, because it's part of her problematic decision making, and also her yearning to be loved, like leads her down like many problematic choices. And I think the chapter that where there's a potential, I don't want to, how do I answer this without any spoilers? I'm gonna say more generally that like a lot of my fiction has been about female sexuality and desire. And like, that's just a subject that I could write about endlessly. And so it was always going to be part of this book. But I think what made it more fraught in the world of the school is that the moms are just not supposed to be sexual beings. Like, they're only supposed to think about their children. Like, they're not supposed to think about them. They're not supposed to have any desires besides taking care of their child. And so I thought in that pressure cooker atmosphere that the moms would do interesting things under that kind of microscope.
And they do interesting things under that kind of microscope, for sure. This is a more open-ended question from Trick. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. What are your influences and or favorites? Literature, music, essays, film, whatever.
What are my influences?
Tell us your influences and then tell us your favorites too of everything.
Of everything. Oh, I'm not sure the Center for Fiction will be thrilled with like all the I could give, but some of my favorite authors are, I love Michael Ondaatje, I love Joan Didion. I've read Wide Sargasso Sea probably 6 times. I'm always rereading Anne Carson and Carmen Machado. And one of the main influences for the creation of the school is my friend Diane Cook's short story called Moving On from her collection Man v Nature. So that was a really direct inspiration for the school. And she said she's okay with that, so don't worry. And I really love the world building in Diane's work and in Karen Russell's work. And one book that I love recommending, because I think it's not really widely read, is called Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls, which is about an unhappy housewife who falls in love with a mysterious sea creature who's escaped from a nearby lab. And it's a very strange novel. It's about 100 pages. It's a perfect book in every way. I also love Patricia Highsmith, and I read The Price of Salt really slowly while revising this book. Let's see, film. I have to say I haven't listened to music very much in years and years, because I moved to New York in 2008. In all of my 20s, I listened to music constantly, but I think I moved to New York and I just was so oversaturated with everything that I just sort of stopped listening to albums at that point. But I used to listen constantly to PJ Harvey, who I'm obsessed with. But a lot of my musical tastes are probably stuck in the like college in the late 90s. And film-wise, I actually was binge watching Top of the Lake season 1 at the time that I started working on this project, which I don't necessarily recommend doing if you're in a friend's house in upstate New York by yourself, snowed in, not speaking to anyone for 2 weeks. So that is a very creepy show to watch when you're by yourself. But I love Jane Campion. I love Wong Kar-wai. I really love Sofia Coppola. Like that probably isn't the most obvious influence, but I really gravitate toward a lot of the filmmakers who are more image heavy than chatty.
And your book itself is so cinematic. You can just picture it all perfectly. The pink uniforms and the way that the school looks, and like the sophomore campus, and everything just seems so vivid and real. And I know that the book has been optioned, is in development as a TV show. Well, tell me, I don't want to, I'm trying to, I always have such trouble parsing like what the announcements mean. What does it all mean? Will you tell us? Is exciting stuff ahead?
We sold TV rights for the potential to develop it as an ongoing series. So there is potentially more story beyond what's in the book. But
oh my gosh.
So I'm signed on as an executive producer, which is like a crazy thing to say out loud. And Jessica Chastain's company, Freckle Films, is the company that bought the rights, and then Endeavor Content, the studio that made The Lost Daughter and a lot of other really exciting projects, is the studio attached, and Jude Wang is the director. So those pieces of the creative team have been announced, and it's just really mind-boggling. And it was crazy. It was crazy to do those phone calls during during the pandemic.
I can't imagine how crazy it must have been. And I'm so, knowing that this would even continue the story, I feel like I'm waiting. The ending was so exciting, and I don't even want to describe it because I'm so afraid of giving like a spoilery tone even, but it was a wonderful ending, and it leaves me, they're very vivid. All your characters and all their situations are very vivid in your readers' minds, I think, in my mind. And I think we can't wait for more, Jasmine, over and over and over again. I'm looking at the time. I know we're getting to 8 o'clock. And I just want to, Jasmine, thank you so much for writing this brilliant book and for sharing it with us. And it's just extraordinary work.
Thank you so much for joining me for this event, and for reading and finding me on the internet. It's been really exciting to have my book lead to new friendships, and I'm clinking glasses with you in my mind tonight.
I know, absolutely. I wish we were in person, but soon.
And thank you, Center for Fiction, for hosting us.
Thank you, Center for Fiction.
Yeah, thank you guys, Jasmine and Julia, for this wonderful conversation. If you haven't bought The School for Good Mothers yet, go buy it from the Center for Fiction online or in our bookstore in Brooklyn. If you have read it already, go buy it for all your friends. And thank you to our wonderful Zoom audience for being here. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.